Good morning, Martin Harvey with Ephlux here, and I have the pleasure of hosting Dave Moran on Hangout today. And Dave is a renowned Agile coach, blogger, and author. And Dave, we're in the business of providing IT solutions and integrated solutions and services to people, and we're big fans and advocates of Agile. And we have our own particular way of using this, which we point Agile outsourcing. But rather than talk about us, we just want to get your thoughts on Agile today, particularly in terms of how we deliver services to people and how they benefit from this. So, good to have you on today.
Great. It's great to be here. Thank you, Martin.
Okay. So, nice to see, Dave, your timeless agility post with the neat pyramid, and I guess pyramids are pretty timeless, aren't they? So a nice little metaphor from that. But I like the way it's explained Agile. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this, Dave?
Yeah, certainly. And actually, that model really came from Alan Kelly, who wrote a book he titled "Changing Software Development: Learning to Become Agile." And I find this a good, useful tool using that pyramid to kind of explain the difference between what doing Agile is and what being Agile is all about. So doing Agile is kind of represented by methodologies at the very top of that pyramid. So Scrum being like the most popular methodology in use today is one of those. XP would be another one, for example. And Scrum really, as we know, is a framework for teams to self-organize and self-manage their own work. But here's the real deal with this. The difficulty a lot of organizations get into with implementing Agile is Scrum is what they see. So that's what they observe the teams using, and they end up equating agility to being the framework itself. So what they see and what they see the teams doing, the task boards and the burn down charts and that type of thing. If you look a little deeper, and really without looking deeper, organizations can risk hanging on to a lot of the same beliefs and behaviors that govern their work that they do today. And that's where they miss out on a truly transformational opportunity. And really that transformational experience is where the other three layers of that pyramid are involved, and that's the bulk of the pyramid. It's where we also find those timeless qualities of people, teams, and the organization at large. So if you look at the base of the pyramid, if starting there, there's 4 layers. So Scrum being at the top layer, the implementation. But if we go to the very bottom, we find that there's a learning organization in play. And that's really kind of the foundational piece. So Peter Senge wrote a book, wrote about 5 characteristics of learning organizations in his book, The Fifth Discipline. And they involve systems thinking, personal mastery, mental models, a shared vision, and team learning. So these concepts really can be implemented in more specific ways as we move up the pyramid and become agile. So this kind of being agile actually gets you into some very specific ways of implementing a learning organization. So the next level up from being a learning organization, the next piece of this is lean. And we find there are 7 principles of lean development: eliminating waste, amplify learning, decide as late as possible, and that last responsible moment type of thing, deliver as fast as possible, and empower the team, build integrity in. So again, are we delivering the right solution in the right way, and seeing the whole. And we want to optimize the whole, and not sub-optimize development at the expense of QA or something like that. So these concepts really you can kind of see how things are building on as we move up the pyramid. And then we get Agile that sits above Lean, and that's really including the 4 values and 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto. And I'm not going to bother to bore people and enumerate those now, but they really, all these Agile values and principles support what we find in the lower layers of lean and learning organizations. And then finally we move to something like Scrum, and that's really just a specific implementation of all those principles and concepts of the layers below that.
Okay. Hey, that's great. I particularly like the way you can contextualize that, because it's not just saying, hey, let's press the Scrum button. So that's yeah. But you mentioned about the Agile Manifesto, and I'm one of those maybe few people actually like and read and really got turned on by that. But you provide a brief example of that in the layers. Can you expand and amplify on that a bit? Dave?
Yeah, sure. And actually, when you look at when we first adopted Agile, we had the values and principles printed out. There was a champion in our office. We call them placemats. He actually put them together so we could all have them around the office. But, you know, they get to be a little difficult sometimes when you look at them and you look at Scrum and how do we make, you know, apply those in actual day-to-day practice. But if you look at something like continuous improvement was the example I used in the blog. So one of the principles of the Agile Manifesto states that at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So there's some specific guidance around the principle, but Scrum provides a mechanism for that. It's the sprint retrospective. So at the end of a sprint, teams evaluate on, you know, how the sprint went, what did they do right, what do they need to improve. So that's really kind of an implementation. Scrum provides an implementation of that principle. If you look below that, and this is where lean and learning organization layers actually support that as well, one of the characteristics of a learning organization is team learning. So, and team learning is a little different than individual learning, and there are many other things about learning organizations that kind of allow people and teams to really conduct effective learning, such as taking a systems view, using mental models so we can discuss our assumptions with others, that type of thing. And really, likewise, the lean principles want us to amplify learning by experimenting and leveraging short feedback cycles that are part of Agile iterative development. And this can apply to not only learning about what the teams are building, but how they are building it. So Scrum teams really learn how to build solutions more efficiently and effectively by reflecting on how they can improve, experiment with new practices, that type of thing. And they also continually update their understanding about what to build based on customer feedback. So the learning is amplified through these short feedback loops, and again, the shorter cycles you have of delivery, the faster your learning is going to be, and all that's part of the Agile delivery model and cycle.
I particularly like the whole introspection idea, but frankly, often that seems to be the thing that often gets, it's the first thing thrown out, isn't it?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Maybe it's because people used to call it post-mortem, which I thought was a particularly unfortunate thing to call it. But anyway, your article did discuss agility as something, you know, it's not just something to the organization, but personal, team, and the organizational level. Particularly like that. But can you start to expand on that and give some context to that?
Yeah, certainly. I'd be happy to. And it really is, you're building on that continuous improvement example that was part of the blog. At a personal level, you know, there's some qualities that we need to possess. Dr. Carol Dweck published some interesting research on this in her book, Mindset, the New Psychology of Success. And at an individual level, we're talking about, you know, really a good quality to have is a growth mindset. And that's really somebody who's concerned about personal growth and improvement. And she also contrasted that with somebody who has a fixed mindset. And that's really kind of a limiting concerns, because really we're more concerned about how we're going to be judged by others. And fixed mindsets tend to really hold the belief that our abilities are carved in stone. And so the individuals with a fixed mindset don't really value investing time and effort in stretching and changing. And you know, the fixed mindset gets in our way because we want to seek validation and to prove that we're already smart and talented as we are today. A growth mindset really kind of looks at, and it really gives us kind of that mental freedom to acknowledge that we don't know everything now, and it's okay because we believe we can stretch and develop ourselves. So personal mastery, again, another one of those characteristics of a learning organization, is really all about having that growth-oriented, continual learning mode mindset that goes with Agile. You know, and moving on to a team level, you know, you can kind of see how this quality at a personal level can impact team learning. Although, you know, really teams really, if you're an Agile team, you really need to take this personal mastery to another level. A team that seeks to continuously improve must be open and honest with each other. And we want to look pretty hard at reality in a constructive way. So we need to be able to acknowledge our personal abilities and our abilities to collaborate with one another. You know, we're combining tasks with Agile teams, interacting in high bandwidth ways to produce a team outcome. So a fixed mindset is going to tend to shy away from reality if that reality is exposing weaknesses, for example. So teams really have to kind of take this personal mastery and kind of crank it up a notch and look at things and interact well with each other to improve as a team. And then you move up to an organizational level, and again, some of those same qualities that enable learning need to be supported really across the board. So having that systems view, seeing the whole, respectful inquiry so that assumptions can be challenged, etc. These are examples of what needs to come into play. And really, I think the qualities, these types of qualities need to be modeled as behaviors by leaders so they really can take root in an organization and become part of that organizational DNA. And it's equally important that we build the capability to share knowledge laterally across the organization by doing things like setting up communities of practice. And I'll state a personal preference of mine is when you set up these communities of practices, get away from the best practices label. You know, if you're supporting continuous improvement, you don't want to label something as best, right? It gets into you're kind of freezing something at a point in time, and then you start creating some frustrating bureaucracy sometimes that needs to be overcome if a team wants to experiment with some new approach, right? A different approach. I once worked for a company. We had something where they called the development guide, and it kind of morphed into something more than a guide. It became a rule book. And deviating from that guide or requesting a change, you can imagine, it became a lot of work. And there was a lot of incentive to retain and use what was regarded as proven techniques, regardless of the circumstances a team might be facing on the ground at a given point in time.
Yeah, I particularly like that anecdote about not calling them best practices.
Yeah,
because it's a good. Because as Tony Bennett said, the best is yet to come, right?
Right.
So but that's a particularly good one. I like that. That's great. But I also like the context you put on the whole organization, because I'm a personal believer that things like agility, Scrum, whatever we want to talk about implementing, really do come from the top. They don't happen at a bunch of developers at the bottom, if I can use that. But since we're talking about the personal team and organizational agility, how do you recommend that the organization takes that step down the agile path?
Well, yeah. So I think a lot of companies are doing the starting the point right. You're starting at a team level. I think that the challenge and the danger you want to really look at with Agile is don't limit the learning about Agile to just the team. Agile is not just something the development team does. Project managers and managers in particular who are interacting with these Agile teams need to understand the underlying values and principles. Especially if you're injecting an Agile team into what's a non-Agile organization, there's going to be some of that friction that's going to come into play as the team interacts with the rest of the organization at large. People still don't work in isolation. Getting back to that systems thinking approach, and project managers and managers are really in a great position to help teams overcome some of this friction, and they can help start educating the rest of the organization on what Agile change is going to be and driving some of that change across the rest of the organization.
All right. Well. Maybe that just prompted another question in my mind, and maybe a little contrarian, because I'm not sure if I really believe in this question, but I've got to ask it. But why does the rest of the organization then need to understand what Agile is and what these funny developers are doing in the conference room, all the sticky notes and so forth? I mean, after all, if this development team is delivering frequently and so the key stakeholders see lots of stuff coming out and hopefully real happy, what the heck do they need to understand more?
Right. Oh, yeah, that's great. And there's a number of things that come to mind here, right? So in the first place, I think, it's easy for executives to understand features are going to be delivered incrementally. That's part of one of the Agile value propositions, like continuous and early and often delivery of features, right? So you can see working software. And that's a big selling point. It's a huge advantage over being 50% complete on a project plan someplace, but you don't actually see anything working yet, right? You just have to. That's an leap of faith that you're really 50% done when somebody says they are, right? Without seeing anything. Other practices, I think, get a little harder to let go of, and that's where some of these conflicting expectations can emerge in organizations. Typically, we detail requirements in a traditional approach. We detail everything up front and create these detailed project plans that most people don't believe. Okay, nobody ever says at the end of a project, wow, we hit that plan exactly as we initially put it together, right? So, really, Agile is about getting to work quicker and using lightweight techniques to outline the development effort and using more of that just-in-time requirements elaboration. For example, when we talk about requirements. Just like lean manufacturing today, anybody worth their salt in the manufacturing environment is not going to build up excessive inventory of goods. They know enough to really approach that as a just-in-time basis. So what we're trying to do with Agile development and our requirements are let's get an idea of what we want to build, but let's elaborate and kind of build those out on a just-in-time basis. So what we're doing is deferring on elaborating those requirements to a time that's closer when the team will actually be implementing them. And so that means there's some implications there, right? There's going to be some continuous planning as opposed to one big shot planning thing. So we reduce the initial planning effort, but we spread the planning out throughout an Agile development cycle. And we're not doing it all up front. And that's another expectations area where you need regular business interaction as you're doing this continuous planning, because you're elaborating things on a just-in-time basis. So traditional approaches ask for a big chunk of time with the business up front, then they can go back to doing their work for a while, and then they wait for delivery, and then there's a point towards the end of a project where they review what the development team built, and then we can start pointing out all the things they got wrong, right? And then we have to figure out what do we do with that.
Yep. Yeah, good points, Dave. You know what? As an old project manager, I'm the guy who believes the planning is more important than the plan.
Right.
You know, and I think Agile to me sustains and stands behind it. So, but this does lead to some very, very challenging conversations, to say the least. I mean, what about other sorts of friction? Because you're working with lots of people, lots of other people, such as those encountered by the middle management who have to work with this output and have to collaborate with this process. Right?
Sure. So, and a big change comes when teams, you start off with Agile initially, you get past that initial implementation, and the teams really start understanding more about the underlying principles of being Agile. And a lot of managers today are striving to operate the business in ways that, lean manufacturing really has gotten away from. For example, and this gets back to some of that traditional project management approach where we view each person as resources, right? And we want to utilize each resource as close to 100%, utilize them as close to as 100% as possible to, increase productivity. And this is where, if you really think about it, that can create inventory. There's demands for requirements if you're going to feed developers to have these things so they can build some things. And there's always more developers in an organization that I've ever worked with than QA staff. So if developers are cranking out code, they're going to be piling up a bunch of stuff in front of QA at some point, right? So you're going to get this inventory. There's demand for inventory to feed the developers, and they're going to be basically putting out inventory that we're not geared to. There's a constraint on the QA side. So there's, and really, how much of that is going to be considered high quality work and really valued by the customer is the other challenge there, right? And, how much is going to be changed because once the customer actually sees the working software, they might decide, and I can't count the number of times I've heard, now that I see it, right? And then that starts the change conversation that's about to come up as to what needs to be different. And, really, if we want to eliminate that, lean principles say, let's eliminate waste. So let's not waste effort on building it. No, number one, we're building up a lot of inventory, and then by the time it gets to the customer, it may change, so there's wasted effort completely through that cycle. And the worst part is because of that QA constraint, it's likely that we're going to have a long delay before we get that customer feedback. So there's a long feedback loop, a long learning loop that's involved there. And so that's the idea with Agile, is we want to really shift the focus to producing a customer outcome, less emphasis on those intermediate outputs and keeping people at 100% capacity. Let's just flow the value to the customer and focus on the feedback and the learning loop from them. Flow something of small but of high quality and get that validated learning from the customer so that we know that we're building the right thing, making sure we're building those small things right. Because really, Agile also says, let's not ignore some of these intermediate steps. Development, really, we want good design and technical excellence as part of the Agile delivery that allows us to deliver continually throughout a long period of time on a regular cadence. If you don't pay attention to the quality of your code, the code base is going to erode, and it's going to be harder to implement features. It's going to take you more time and effort to do that down the road. But really, it comes back to we want to make sure that we're delivering small features to aggressively manage the ROI of each product. Really, the small features, each one of those represents an opportunity to make economic decisions and impact the ROI of the product, whether or not the customer values them. Maybe something's taking you 3 times longer to build than you thought initially. So that maybe that, on a feature-by-feature basis, you have an option to, let's pull this from this delivery cycle and either think about how we approach this differently so it doesn't take 3 times as much effort as we thought, or is the cost benefits not worth it anymore? Let's have a conversation with the customer. Maybe that just gets jettisoned from the whole product.
All right. So, okay, yeah, I like that thought. So, you talked about the customer. So, another quality of the organization, and if it indeed does see the whole and focuses on delivering value to the customer first and foremost. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what else should today's functional managers be doing differently? What qualities should they possess?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, really, I like how Mike Rother put it in his book, The Toyota Kata. And he talks really about, what Toyota's managers do today. And they don't, focus exclusively on improvement. It's not to say that they're always looking to improve at Toyota, but, they're concentrating on increasing the improvement capability of their people. So in learning organizations, you think about the frequent delivery cycles. Managers really need to spend time developing their people so they can continue to learn new practices and learn new ways of approaching work, and developing themselves, and really developing their people so that learning is timely. And there's going to be more of a strain because of these short delivery cycles. There's going to be more of a challenge and more of a demand to get timely learning in place. Another way that to help managers can help people and teams is really the qualities of transparency and visibility. And typically we equate with Agile teams transparency and visibility being what the team is doing. You have the burn down charts, you have their task boards that are out there, so you can see what the team is up to. But there's another way that transparency can become a two-way advantage. Managers understand certain things that development teams would find useful, and they have access to business metrics such as profitability per customer. What's the product portfolio mix look like, and profitability on the portfolio mixes. All of this information, if you actually feed this to development teams, so that they understand more about the business, it builds a certain sense of commitment and understanding, and in some cases a sense of urgency that can come into play that'll keep people and employees really aligned with the strategic initiatives of the organization, because they are more informed about the business.
All right, and that's great. I particularly like the example you used of Toyota, Dave. And I'll tell you why. Because like Toyota, we're in the business of our customers are actually customers who pay in the end, pay our way and pay our salaries and wages. I mean that's the ultimate measurement of what we deliver. So, and that's what Toyota does. This is their customer, the people going to buy their cars. So I like the example. So thanks very much for those provoking thoughts today. I really appreciate the conversation.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thank you.